Good evening, listeners. Welcome to Noir Intellect. I'm your host, Victor Blackwood. If you enjoy mysteries, hidden clues, and uncovering the truth, don't forget to like and subscribe. And tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Leave it in the comments below. Now, keep your eyes open and your mind sharp. The mystery begins now. Chapter 1. The Missing Guest. A man who attends a dinner without being invited may be a nuisance, a thief, or a bore. A man who is remembered by everyone but seen by no one is something else. Inspector Kramer brought us such a man on a wet Thursday morning. At the time, Nero Wolfe was in the dining room deciding whether Fritz had used too much tarragon in an egg dish. I was in the office opening the mail and deciding whether 3 unpaid bills could be persuaded to wait until Friday. The rain tapped the front windows with the patience of a creditor. The doorbell rang at 10:17. Kramer entered without taking off his hat until I reminded him that Wolfe disliked wet felt in the office. He handed me the hat, kept his cigar and marched to the red leather chair. "Where is he?" "Eating. I know he eats. I have seen the results. You can tell him that yourself when he comes in." Kramer looked as if he might prefer to tell him with a warrant. Before he could improve the idea, Wolfe entered from the hall. He crossed to his desk, settled into his custom-made chair, and regarded Kramer with no sign of pleasure. "Good morning, Inspector. It may improve. That depends upon when you leave." Kramer removed the cigar from his mouth. "Samuel Whitmore was murdered last night." Wolfe's eyes narrowed slightly. Samuel Whitmore was the head of Whitmore House, one of the largest publishing firms in New York. He printed novels, political memoirs, school books, and enough advice about marriage to ruin thousands of homes. His picture appeared in newspapers several times a year. He had white hair, heavy eyebrows, and the expression of a man who expected every sentence to be revised before reaching him. "How?" Wolfe asked. "Poison, probably. We are waiting for the laboratory." "Where?" "His study. Townhouse on East 72nd Street. Dinner party. 8 guests. Then you have 8 suspects." 9? Wolfe's lips tightened. "You said 8 guests. There were 8 names on the list. Every witness remembers 9 people. That got my pencil moving." Kramer leaned forward. Whitmore gave a private dinner for 8 people connected with a new book he planned to publish. At 12:15, he was found dead behind his desk. No forced entry, no broken windows, no servants missing. Everyone agrees a 9th guest was present. "Name?" Wolfe asked. "There is one." "Description?" "Tall, grey suit, dark hair, about 45, quiet." "Who invited him?" "Nobody." "Who spoke with him?" Kramer's jaw shifted. "That is the problem. Everyone remembers seeing him. Nobody remembers a conversation." Wolfe looked at me. "Archie!" "A tall man in a grey suit who went to dinner and saved his voice. New York should erect a statue." Kramer ignored me. "The butler remembers taking his coat, but no extra coat was found. The maid remembers setting a 9th place, but the dining table was photographed after dinner and showed only 8 guest settings plus Whitmore's. The cook says 9 guests were served. The service record lists 8. "Who found the body?" Wolfe asked. "Whitmore's secretary, Lydia Crane." "Was she among the guests?" "Yes." "Names of the others?" Kramer took a page from his pocket. "Jonathan Bell, Whitmore's business partner. Lydia Crane, his secretary. Alden, a novelist. Margaret Sloane, a literary agent. Dr. Henry Cobb, a historian. Clara Vance, Whitmore's niece. Edwin Shaw, the company accountant. Robert Keene, a newspaper columnist." "I wrote them down," Wolfe asked. "Why were they assembled?" "Whitmore intended to announce a major publication, a book called The Private Ledger. Subject? Unknown. The manuscript is missing. That made the imaginary guest more useful." Kramer continued. "Whitmore told several people the book would expose financial and political corruption. He claimed it contained names, dates, and original documents. He planned to reveal the author at dinner." "Did he?" "No. Dinner ended around 10:30. Whitmore said the announcement would come at midnight. At 11:50, he went to his study. At 12:15, Miss Crane found him dead. The manuscript was gone. And the 9th guest? Gone too." Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes. Kramer waited 10 seconds. He never enjoys waiting for Wolfe, but sometimes he is willing to suffer for a result. Wolfe opened his eyes. "You believe the unknown man took the manuscript and killed Whitmore?" I believe someone did. Yet no physical evidence establishes that the man existed. That is why I am here. You want me to find a person who may not exist. I want you to explain why 9 witnesses remember him. Wolfe's finger traced a small circle on the arm of his chair. 9, 8 guests and the butler. What does the maid remember? She remembers setting his place but cannot describe him. The cook? He saw no guests. He says the butler told him there were 9. Then only the 8 guests and the butler claim to have seen the man. Kramer frowned. That is still 9 witnesses. No, it is 9 statements. The distinction is essential. Kramer put the cigar back in his mouth. Are you taking it? No? Why not? You have presented a riddle, not a client. Kramer stood. Fine. Stay here with your flowers. When I arrest the wrong person, you can complain about police methods. I frequently do. Kramer took 2 steps toward the door, then stopped. The district attorney will pay your usual fee. Wolfe opened his eyes wider. I said. That transformed the riddle. Wolfe ignored me. Archie will inspect the house and interview the witnesses. I shall decide later whether the matter deserves further attention. Kramer grunted. That was as close to victory as either man allowed the other. 40 minutes later, I was riding uptown with him. Samuel Whitmore's townhouse was 6 stories of dark brick, polished stone, and inherited confidence. A patrolman stood at the entrance. Reporters clustered across the street beneath umbrellas, looking like mushrooms with notebooks. Inside, the entrance hall was wide enough for a modest parade. A staircase climbed along one wall. Opposite, it stood a pair of carved doors leading to the drawing room. The butler introduced himself as Charles Danner. He was tall, thin and grey-haired, with a face trained not to react when wealthy people behave badly. You admitted the guests? I asked. Yes, sir. How many? 9. Name them. He gave me the same 8 names Kramer had supplied. And the 9th? The gentleman in grey, did he give a name? Danner hesitated. I believe, Mr. Whitmore greeted him before I could ask. You believe? I was helping Miss Sloane with her coat. When I turned, the gentleman was already inside. Did you take his coat? Where is it? I cannot explain that. Try. Danner led me to a panelled cloakroom near the entrance. 8 coats and 3 umbrellas had been collected after the murder. There was no 9th coat. What kind was it? I asked. Dark wool, perhaps black. Hat? I do not recall. Did you see him leave? No. Did you speak to him at any? No. You remember a man entering, but not his name, voice, hat, or departure. Danner's face tightened. I remember him clearly. Describe his eyes, det. His nose? I cannot. His tie? Dark. Shows? I did not notice. I smiled. That is not clear memory. That is a grey suit standing where a face should be. The dining room held a long walnut table. The dishes had been removed, but place cards remained in an evidence envelope. There were 8 cards for guests and 1 for Whitmore. No card for the grey man, I said. Kramer nodded. Everyone says he sat near the far end. Where exactly? That changes depending on who tells it. We entered the study. Samuel Whitmore had died behind a broad desk facing the door. The body was gone, but the chair remained. A glass of water stood on a side table. A silver box lay open near the blotter. Papers had been searched, though perhaps by Whitmore himself. One drawer stood partly open. A framed photograph showed Whitmore beside a younger woman who resembled Clara Vance. Kramer pointed toward the carpet. He fell from the chair, struck the edge of the desk, and landed there. No struggle. The medical examiner found signs of rapid poisoning. What poison? Not confirmed. Food? Possibly. Drink, medicine, or something swallowed after dinner. I examined the silver box. It had held throat tablets. One remained inside. Did Whitmore use them regularly? His secretary says he did. Then I would test the tablets before blaming dinner. Kramer's eyes narrowed. We are testing everything. The missing manuscript had apparently been placed in the desk drawer before dinner. Whitmore had shown the sealed package to Lydia Crane at 6 that evening. At midnight it was gone. I began with the guests. Jonathan Bell was first. He was 55, heavy through the chest, and dressed in mourning before anyone had suggested it. As Whitmore's business partner, he had spent 27 years agreeing with Samuel in public and fighting him in private. The man in grey sat opposite Dr. Cobb, Bell said. Did you speak to him? No. Did anyone? Mr. Keene may have. Robert Keene denied it. He was a narrow man with bright eyes and a voice that sounded sharpened. The grey man stood near the fireplace before dinner, Keene said. I assumed he was connected with the manuscript. Why? Whitmore kept looking at him. Did the man respond? I do not remember. Margaret Sloane remembered him beside the window. Peter Alden remembered him near the drinks table. Dr. Henry Cobb remembered him entering the library after dinner. Clara Vance remembered him on the staircase. Edwin Shaw remembered him beside Whitmore in the drawing room. Lydia Crane remembered him in the dining room, but nowhere else. 8 witnesses, 8 locations, no conversation, no name, and no face. The descriptions agreed only on height, grey suit, dark hair, and silence. At 5:15 I telephoned Wolfe. You have interviewed them, he asked. All 8 plus the butler. The missing guest was everywhere except where anyone could speak to him. Did the witnesses describe him before hearing another description? That was the question I should have asked first. I do not know. Find out. Kramer obtained the original police interview sequence. Dana had been questioned first. He had said, there was another gentleman, tall, in a grey suit. The phrase appeared in the next statement, made by Lydia Crane. By the 4th interview, the man had dark hair. By the 6th, he was about 45. By the 8th, every witness remembered him. I called Wolfe again. The description grew while the interviews continued. Dana supplied the height and suit. Crane added the hair. Bell guessed the age. The others accepted the complete version. Good. You think there was no 9th guest? I think memory is hospitable. It often admits visitors without checking invitations. What planted him? Something each witness saw, heard, or expected. That is what you are there to discover. I spent another hour searching the house. In the drawing room, I found a grey suit jacket hanging over the back of a chair behind a folding screen. It belonged to Samuel Whitmore, Clara Vance said. He had changed before dinner after spilling ink on one sleeve. In the entrance hall, a tall mirror stood beside the drawing room doors. From the dining room, a person passing near the mirror could be seen only as a dark reflection in grey. On a small table lay a stack of place cards. The top card was blank. In the library fireplace, among half-burnt paper, I found the corner of a printed dinner schedule. It listed 9 courses, not 9 guests. Those details could create confusion, but not agreement. The most useful object was in the study wastebasket. It was a typed note, torn once across the middle. Please expand 1 additional guest. He may arrive without introduction. No signature. I showed it to Kramer. Who received this? He asked. Probably the servants, maybe others. Dana admitted that he had found the note on the hall table at 6:30. He had told the maid and cook to expect another person. During dinner preparation, Lydia Crane had heard him mention the unnamed guest. Margaret Sloane had overheard Crane ask whether the extra man had arrived. By the time dinner began, everyone expected to see him. Expectation had done the rest. But someone had typed the note. At 7:30, I returned to West 35th Street. Wolfe was in the office drinking beer. I reported everything, including the torn message. He read my notes with his eyes closed. There was no 9th guest, I said. Not physically. Someone planted the expectation. Then each witness built a memory from shadows, reflections, and other people's certainty. Yes. Why? Wolfe opened his eyes. To provide the murderer with an imaginary suspect. The grey man was created before Whitmore died. Therefore the murder was planned before dinner. And the manuscript. Taken by someone whose presence required no invention. I sat down at my desk. One of the 8 guests, or a servant. You are interested now. I am being paid. That has always been your most human quality. Wolfe frowned. Archie, obtain the typewriter that produced the note. Also determine which guest first told another that the grey man had arrived. You think the first person who confirmed him created him, perhaps? A false memory spreads from a seed. Find who planted it. Outside, the rain had stopped. The wet street reflected the lamps, and the brownstone settled into evening. Samuel Whitmore had invited 8 guests to dinner. Before midnight, one of them had murdered him. To escape suspicion, the killer had created a 9th guest from a grey jacket, a reflection, a typed note, and the willingness of intelligent people to remember what they had been told to expect. The man in grey had never entered the house, yet somehow he had already become the chief suspect. Chapter 2. 8 Witnesses. One stranger by 10. The next morning, the non-existent guest had acquired 3 voices, 4 faces, and at least 5 inches of height. That was progress of a kind. Wolfe had gone upstairs to the plant rooms at 9, leaving me with instructions to interview Samuel Whitmore's 8 guests separately and prevent them from exchanging further memories. Preventing 8 wealthy and frightened people from talking is not work for one man, but Inspector Kramer had supplied 2 policemen, 3 rooms at the Whitmore townhouse, and the threat of arrest for anyone who tried to leave. I began with Lydia Crane. She sat in the library, beneath a portrait of Samuel Whitmore that made death look like an improvement in temperament. Lydia was 36, dark-haired, and so neatly dressed that grief seemed another item she had arranged before breakfast. She had served as Whitmore's private secretary for 11 years. "You told the police the extra guest was tall," I said. "He was." "Perhaps 6 feet. Yesterday you said 6 feet 3. I was upset yesterday." "Were you calmer during dinner?" Her eyes cooled. "I saw him near the fireplace. Did you speak to him?" "Yes." "That was new. What did he say?" "He asked whether Mr. Whitmore intended to make his announcement before midnight." "What kind of voice?" "Deep, cultivated." "Exact words?" She hesitated. "Something close to that." "Did you answer?" "I said I did not know." "Did anyone hear you?" "I don't believe so." "What was he wearing? A grey suit, light or dark?" "Medium grey." "Hair?" "Black." "I did not notice." "Tie?" "Blue, I think." "You spoke with a man at close range, but remember his suit better than his face." She drew a breath. "It was a confused evening." "That is what someone was counting on?" I asked, when she had first heard that an additional guest was expected. She said Charles Danner had mentioned it around 7. Danner had found the typed note on the hall table and asked whether Whitmore had invited anyone else. "What did you tell him?" "That Mr. Whitmore often changed arrangements without informing the household." "Did you tell the others?" "I may have mentioned it." "To whom?" "Margaret Sloane and Jonathan Bell." That gave the grey man 2 routes into the party before dinner had begun. Next came Jonathan Bell. Bell looked as if he had spent the night arguing with his pillow and lost. His collar was tight, his eyes were red, and his patience had gone somewhere without leaving an address. "I have already described the fellow," he said. "Describe him again." "Tall, grey suit, dark hair." "How tall? 5'10" or 11? Miss Crane puts him at 6 feet. Lydia exaggerates. "Hair brown," she says. "Black. Dark brown can look black." Voice sharp, almost nasal. Bell had not merely seen the stranger. He now remembered being asked for a match near the drawing-room window. "Did you give him one?" "I don't smoke cigarettes." "What did he do?" "Walked away." "Which hand did he use?" Bell stared at him. "What? To take the match you did not give him?" I said he asked. "I did not say he took one." "Did you see his face?" "Not clearly." "Then how do you know it was the stranger?" "He was wearing grey." "So was Samuel Whitmore before dinner." Bell's jaw moved. "I told him about Whitmore's grey jacket hanging behind the screen. He claimed he had never seen it. That was possible. It was also possible he had seen the jacket, seen its reflection in the tall hall mirror, and supplied a man because he expected one." Margaret Sloane was waiting in the morning room. She was a literary agent in her late 40s, handsome, quick-eyed, and equipped with the confidence of a woman who had told many authors their masterpieces required cutting. "The stranger was not tall," she said. "He only seemed tall because he was thin." "How thin?" "Very." "Hair light brown, perhaps touched with grey." "Voice?" "Soft." "Did you speak with him?" "He asked whether Peter Alden was present." Why would a guest at a dinner need to ask? Perhaps they had never met. "What did you say?" I pointed Peter out. "Where was the stranger standing?" "Near the dining room doors." "Who saw you?" "No one." That made 3 private conversations without witnesses. "Had Lydia Crane told you to expect another guest?" I asked. Margaret folded her hands. She said Samuel had invited someone connected with the manuscript. "Before you saw him?" "Yes." "Did you know his name?" "No." "Did you ask?" "I assumed Samuel would introduce him." "Samuel never did." "No." "Yet you were certain the man you saw was the expected guest." "I had no reason to think otherwise." "You had one excellent reason. He did not exist." She did not like that, but she had no useful reply. Peter Alden occupied Whitmore's study under the eye of a policeman. He was a successful novelist, which meant his photograph appeared on book jackets with a cigarette he did not smoke. He was 42, lean and restless. "The grey man spoke to me after dinner," Alden said. "What about my latest novel? What did he say?" "He said the ending was dishonest." I looked at him. "That is specific." It annoyed me. "Did you ask his name?" "No. A stranger insulted your novel and you let him leave unnamed. I thought Samuel would introduce us later." "What did his voice sound like?" "Low, with a slight accent." "What accent? English, perhaps?" "Miss Crane says cultivated American. Bell says nasal. Margaret Sloane says soft. People hear differently, especially when no one speaks." Alden rose and went to the window. "Are you accusing us all of lying?" "Not necessarily. A person can tell the truth about what he remembers and still be wrong about what happened. That sounds convenient. It is inconvenient enough to put a murderer among 8 dinner guests." Turned. "Did Whitmore discuss the private ledger with you?" I asked. "He said it would destroy several reputations." "Yours?" I asked him that. He laughed. "Did you know the author?" "No." "Did you want the manuscript?" "Every writer wants every manuscript, usually to improve it." He was being charming, which was suspicious but not rare. Dr. Henry Cobb remembered the stranger as nearly bald. Clara Vance remembered thick dark hair. Edwin Shaw remembered a grey mustache. Robert Keene was certain the man was clean-shaven. Cobb, claimed the stranger, had stood beside the library shelves examining a book on American banking. Clara said he crossed the dining room while coffee was served. Shaw remembered him near the staircase. Keene insisted he had occupied a chair near the fireplace for 20 minutes. No 2 witnesses placed him in the same location at the same time. The voices multiplied too: deep, thin, soft, harsh, accented, ordinary. One witness remembered a blue tie, another recalled maroon. Clara Vance thought he wore no tie at all. At 1:30 Kramer joined me in the dining room. He had spent the morning bullying the servants into repeating their statements. "What have you got?" he asked. 8 strangers wearing one grey suit. He dropped into a chair. "The witnesses are changing their stories. They are improving them. Yesterday, most had only seen him. Today 5 remember conversations. People remember more after sleeping. They also invent more after talking." Kramer took out his cigar. "The servants say there were only 8 guests. Danner said 9 yesterday. He has corrected it. We found Charles Danner in the pantry with the cook and maid." Danner stood stiffly beside a silver tray. The cook, Martha Briggs, was broad and angry. The maid, Alice Dunn, was young and looked frightened by the police, but not by me. Danner said, "I did not actually see a 9th gentleman enter." "That is not what you told us," Kramer said. "I believed I had." "Explain belief." Danner glanced at the maid. "I found the note saying another guest was expected. Later, while assisting Miss Sloane with her wrap, I saw movement in the hall mirror. A man in grey appeared to cross behind me. I assumed it was the additional guest." "Did you turn around?" "Yes." Mr. Whitmore was entering the drawing room. "In his grey jacket," I said. Danner nodded reluctantly. "I realize that now." "Did you take a 9th coat?" "No. I saw 8 coats, but I assumed the gentleman had kept his." "The cook?" Martha Briggs folded her arms. "I served 9 portions because Mr. Danner told me 9 guests were expected. 1 portion came back untouched, which proves that food was wasted. The maid set an extra place." Alice shook her head. "I started to, but Miss Crane told me Mr. Whitmore would seat the additional guest himself. When we went in after dinner, there were only 9 settings of total. Mr. Whitmore and 8 guests. So none of you saw an unknown man?" All 3 said no. Kramer's cigar shifted. "Then why did every guest see him?" I said. "Because the servants told them to expect him, and the guests told one another he had arrived. We reconstructed the evening. At 6:30 Danner found the typed note. At 6:40 he told Lydia Crane. At 7 Lydia mentioned the extra guest to Margaret Sloane and Jonathan Bell. Around 7:15 Bell asked Robert Keene whether he knew the unnamed man. At 7:30 Margaret told Peter Alden the stranger might be connected with the secret manuscript. Before dinner Clara Vance overheard Alden say, "The grey fellow must be the author." Dr. Cobb heard Clara repeat it. Edwin Shaw heard Cobb ask which man was wearing grey. By 8 o'clock, every guest expected a tall stranger in a grey suit, though no one had supplied the word tall. until Dana described the reflection he had seen. Expectation had entered first. Memory followed after dinner. Kramer was not satisfied. He prefers murderers who leave fingerprints and witnesses who see faces. 8 intelligent people cannot invent the same person, he said. They did not invent the same person. They invented 8 versions, 5 claim conversations, private conversations. Each one reflects the witness, not the stranger. Lydia's man asked about Whitmore's announcement because she was worried about it. Bell's man asked for a match because Bell was standing near the cigarette box. Margaret's man asked for Alden because she is an agent. Alden's man criticized his novel because Alden expects strangers to discuss his work. Kramer chewed his cigar. What about Cobb? The stranger examined a history of banking. Cobb is a historian. Clara, she saw him on the staircase after worrying someone might enter the family rooms. Sure, he remembers a mustache like the one worn by his former employer. Keene, he remembers a silent man watching everyone because newspaper columnists assume everyone is material. Kramer glared at me. You sound like Wolfe. I have suffered years of exposure. At 2:15, I telephoned the brownstone. Wolfe had finished lunch and was in the office. I reported the contradictions, the servants' corrected statements, and the chain by which expectation had spread. When I finished, Wolfe said, "Who first stated that the expected guest had arrived?" "Possibly Bell." He asked Keene whether he knew the unnamed man. "Possibly" is inadequate. I can continue annoying them. Do so. Also determine the origin of the grey suit. Whitmore wore one before changing for dinner. Who knew he would change? His secretary, and probably the servants. The typed note was designed to combine with a visible suggestion. The murderer did not merely announce another guest. He supplied material from which the witnesses could construct one. The reflection of Whitmore in grey. Yes, perhaps also a jacket, hat, or chair, positioned to be glimpsed indirectly. I remembered the grey jacket behind the folding screen. Someone left Whitmore's jacket where it could appear in the mirror. Find who? The line went dead. I returned to the drawing room and examined the angle. The folding screen stood near the fireplace. Whitmore's grey jacket hung over a chair behind it. From the dining room doorway, only the shoulder and sleeve were visible in the tall mirror. A person moving past would make the reflection shift, creating the impression that someone stood behind the screen. I asked Lydia who had placed the jacket there. "I did," she said. "Why, mister?" Whitmore handed it to me after spilling ink on the cuff. "Why not send it upstairs?" He told me to leave it. He intended to show the cloth to his tailor. Did anyone hear him? Jonathan Bell was in the room. Bell denied hearing the instruction. He also denied touching the jacket. Alice Dunn remembered seeing Robert Keene near the screen before dinner. Keene said he had gone there to examine a photograph. Clara remembered Edwin Shaw moving the chair. He moved it because it blocked the drinks table. Everyone had been near the jacket, which meant the grey reflection could not yet choose a murderer. At 4:30, a laboratory technician telephoned Kramer. The typed note had been produced on a machine with a damaged lowercase e and a slightly raised capital G. Whitmore's household contained 4 typewriters, none matched. Whitmore House, the publishing office, contained more than 40. Kramer swore, I said. At least our imaginary guest had an office. That evening I returned to West 35th Street. Wolfe was finishing his second daily session with the orchids, so I waited in the office until 6. Rain had begun again, soft against the windows. Fritz passed through carrying a covered dish that smelled good enough to make investigation seem selfish. Wolfe entered, sat, and accepted beer. I gave him the full report. The servants saw no stranger, I concluded. The 8 guests contradict one another on height, hair, voice, tie, face, position, and conversation. The only consistent details came from Dana's first description, which was based on Whitmore's reflection. Wolfe poured beer and watched the foam settle. Then the 9th guest did not exist. That seems safe. No conclusion is safe. It is merely supported or unsupported. I waited. He drank and set the glass down. The murderer created a person in advance, allowed the expectation to circulate, and trusted the witnesses to supply memories afterward. An elegant device, but dangerous. Why dangerous? because the false guest was intended to perform an act, steal the manuscript, and perhaps administer the poison. Otherwise, there was no need to create him before the crime. So, one of the 8 will eventually claim he saw the grey man near Whitmore's glass or study. Someone already may have. I checked my notes. Dr. Cobb had placed the stranger in the library near the drinks. Clara Vance had seen him crossing the dining room during coffee. Lydia had him asking about the midnight announcement. Wolfe said, "Find which witness's memory gives the stranger access to the method of murder. That person may have created him. You think the murderer will make the imaginary man too useful. A lie constructed by several minds becomes disorderly. But the original liar has a purpose. Purpose leaves a shape." Outside, a taxi hissed through the wet street. The office lamps cast warm circles across the books and dark wood. Wolfe lifted his beer again, already dismissing me in favor of thought and dinner. 8 witnesses had described one stranger. Each description had been confident. Each was different. The 9th guest had no fixed height, no certain face, and no single voice, because he had never possessed a body. He lived only in suggestions passed from one frightened person to another. But someone had invited him, and that person had expected him to take the blame for murder. Chapter 3. The last conversation police reports are written by men who believe names should behave themselves. Unfortunately, names often have other plans. The business partner listed in Inspector Kramer's first notes as Jonathan Bell was actually Harold Jonathan Benton. He had used the name Jonathan Bell professionally during the early years of Whitmore House, when Samuel Whitmore thought 2 names on a publishing contract sounded more impressive than one. Most employees called him Mr. Benton. Several older authors still called him Bell. Kramer called the confusion unnecessary, and I agreed, though not where he could hear me. At 9:30 Friday morning, Benton entered Wolfe's office wearing a dark suit, a stiff collar, and the expression of a man who had spent the night preparing truthful answers to questions no one intended to ask. He was 55, broad in the chest and heavy around the eyes. He looked prosperous, but publishing prosperity is sometimes only debt wearing a good necktie. Wolfe was upstairs with the orchids. I offered Benton the red leather chair and took my place behind my desk. "You told the police your last conversation with Samuel Whitmore was friendly," I said. "It ended without violence. That is not the same thing. It's close enough. Not in a murder investigation." His fingers tightened on the arms of the chair. "Mr. Goodwin, Samuel and I argued for nearly 30 years. We argued over authors, contracts, printing costs, office furniture, and whether a comma could damage a paragraph. If disagreement were murder, neither of us would have survived the first season. What was different Tuesday night?" He looked toward Wolfe's empty chair. "Company funds were missing. How much? I do not know precisely. That answer has already been tried by several dishonest accountants. I am not an accountant. Edwin Shaw is. What did he tell you?" Benton's mouth flattened. "He found irregular transfers totaling nearly $600,000. Transferred where? Into 3 companies that had supposedly provided editorial research, international rights advice, and promotional services. Did those companies exist? On paper. Who authorized the payments? Samuel's signature appeared on the forms. Was it genuine? That was the question. I wrote, nothing. When a man gives you a useful sentence, sometimes the best way to encourage another is to pretend you missed it." Benton continued. Samuel said the signatures had been copied or transferred from other documents. I believed him. He was vain, secretive, and often cruel, but he was not careless with money. Who could reproduce his signature? His secretary, the accountant. I could. Anyone with access to old contracts could trace it. Did Samuel suspect someone? Yes. Who? He refused to say. That seems inconvenient. He wanted proof before accusing anyone. He said the manuscript he planned to reveal that night would settle the matter. The private ledger? Benton nodded. What did a book manuscript have to do with missing company funds? I do not know. Samuel said it documented a pattern larger than our company. Political corruption? Possibly. Banking, publishing, campaign money. He enjoyed making a secret sound like the fall of civilization. The elevator hummed in the hall. Wolfe entered, crossed to his desk and sat. He looked at Benton. "You argued with Mr. Whitmore shortly before his death." Benton turned toward him. "Yes. Why did you omit the missing funds from your first statement?" "I did not want the company destroyed by rumor. Mr. Whitmore's murder has already inconvenienced its reputation. I was protecting hundreds of employees." "Foof, you were protecting yourself." Benton's face reddened. Wolfe continued. "As business partner, you would be blamed for a shortage whether or not you stole the money." "That is true. What did Whitmore say during the argument?" "He accused me of ignoring warnings from Shaw. I accused him of hiding information. He said he had arranged matters so the guilty person would expose himself before midnight." "How?" "He would not tell me." "Did he mention the additional guest?" Benton hesitated. "Yes." That made Wolfe's eyes narrow. "What did he say?" "He said, 'Our missing gentleman may prove more useful than the invited ones.'" I sat straighter. "Exact words, as closely as I can remember." "When?" "In the study around 9:45. "That was before dinner ended," I said. "Yes." "Did you ask what he meant?" "I assumed he referred to the additional guest, but the additional guest had not arrived. I thought Samuel knew something I did not." Wolfe regarded him for several seconds. "Who ended the conversation?" "Samuel did. He told me to return to the dining room." "Was he angry very?" "Frightened." Benton considered it. "Not frightened. Excited." "Did he have the manuscript?" "There was a sealed packet on his desk." "How large?" "Perhaps 2 inches thick." "Did you touch it?" "No." "Did you see the title?" "Yes." The private ledger was typed on the wrapper. "Was anyone else near the study?" "I saw Lydia Crane in the passage when I came out." "What did she say?" "She asked whether Samuel intended to make announcement early." "Your answer?" "I told her I hoped he would cancel it." Wolfe leaned back. "Did you see the man in grey?" Benton looked annoyed. "I believed I did. That was not my question." "No. I did not see an identifiable stranger." "You previously described a man asking you for a match." "I have reconsidered. I saw someone near the drawing room window. His back was toward me. He wore grey." "Mr. Whitmore?" "Possibly." "Why did you transform him into another man?" "Because I had been told another man was present." Wolfe shut his eyes. Benton looked at me, perhaps wondering whether the interview was over. It was not. Wolfe opened his eyes. "You stated that Whitmore said the missing gentleman might prove useful. If accurate, that sentence suggests he knew the 9th guest was imaginary." Benton frowned. "I had not thought of that. Most people avoid thinking when memory offers something easier." "Are you saying Samuel invented the stranger?" "I am saying he may have known of the invention." Benton stood. "I have told you everything." "No," Wolfe said. "You have told us what you are prepared to admit. That is usually less." Benton left without shaking hands. When the door closed, I said, "Whitmore knew about the fake guest before dinner ended." "Perhaps." "You think Benton invented the quote?" "It is convenient. It shifts knowledge of the deception to the dead man. He also gave us a financial motive, shared among several people." The doorbell rang again. Kramer had brought Lydia Crane, Margaret Sloane, Peter Alden, Clara Vance, Dr. Henry Cobb, Edwin Shaw, and Robert Keane to the brownstone in separate cars. He objected to my interviewing them without police supervision, and Wolfe objected to police supervision interfering with the interviews. They compromised by letting Kramer sit in the front room and dislike everything. I took the witnesses one at a time. The question was simple. When did each first believe the grey-suited stranger had arrived? The answers were not. Lydia Crane said she believed he was present when she saw a grey shoulder near the fireplace shortly before dinner. "Did you see a face?" I asked. "No." "Did the shoulder move?" "I think so." "Before or after Margaret Sloane asked whether the additional guest had arrived?" Lydia paused. "After." Margaret Sloane said Lydia had told her, "He must be the tall man near the window." "I never heard Lydia say that," I said. "She did." "Before you saw him?" "Yes." Peter Alden remembered Margaret pointing toward the drawing room and saying, "There is Whitmore's mystery guest." "What did you see?" I asked. "A man moving past the mirror." "Face?" "No." "Suit?" "Grey." "Could it have been Samuel Whitmore?" "Possibly." Clara Vance had heard Peter Alden refer to the stranger before she saw anyone on the staircase. Dr. Cobb had heard Clara say the unknown man had gone toward the library. Edwin Shaw had heard Cobb ask whether the man was connected with the missing money. Robert Keane had heard Shaw say the stranger might be an investigator. Each memory had been handed forward with something added. By the time Keane looked toward the fireplace, the stranger had acquired a profession, a purpose, and a suspicious silence. I made a diagram. Dana found the typed note. Dana told Lydia. Lydia told Margaret and Benton that an additional guest was expected. Margaret pointed out a reflection to Alden. Alden mentioned the man to Clara. Clara sent him toward the library in Cobb's memory. Cobb connected him to the financial problem. Shaw repeated the connection to Keane. After the murder, Keane told the police that the stranger had watched Whitmore closely. The imaginary guest had traveled around the house without taking a step. Edwin Shaw was the most nervous of the 8. As company accountant, he had discovered the missing funds. He was 48, thin, and wore steel-rimmed glasses that he removed whenever a question became unpleasant. "You told Dr. Cobb the stranger might know about the shortage," I said. "I may have speculated. Before Whitmore died?" "Yes. Who told you there was a shortage?" "Mr. Whitmore and Mr. Benton." "Anyone else know?" "Miss Crane had access to the statements. I do not know whether she understood them." "Did the imaginary man ever speak to you?" Shaw removed his glasses. "I thought he did." "What did he say?" "He asked whether the publishing accounts were audited independently." "That is a remarkably suitable question for a man who did not exist." Shaw wiped the lenses. "I may have heard Dr. Cobb ask it." "Did Dr. Cobb ask you that week?" "So you moved Cobb's question into the mouth of the stranger." "I did not do it deliberately." "I know. Deliberate lies are often neater." Kramer entered after Shaw left. "You are badgering them." "I am sorting their memories." "What have you got?" "A parade." The stranger was introduced to each witness by the one before. Nobody independently saw him. Kramer planted himself near my desk. "What about Benton's argument with Whitmore?" "Missing company funds. $600,000 through fake service companies." "I know. Shaw told us this morning. Whitmore claimed his signature was forged. Benton could have done it. So could Lydia Crane and Shaw. Or Whitmore stole his own money. That would be energetic." Kramer gave me a look. "The medical examiner has confirmed the poison," he said. "Cyanide. That altered the room. Where in one of Whitmore's throat tablets. The tablet in the silver box was harmless. The one he swallowed was not." "How do you know he swallowed one?" "Traces in his mouth and stomach. The silver box usually held 6. Only one remained." "Who had access?" "Half the house." "Who knew he used them?" "Everyone close to him." "Could the poisoned tablet have been placed earlier?" "Yes. It was coated to resemble the others." I called Wolfe from the front room, though he was only 20 feet away, because he had gone to the kitchen to discuss dinner with Fritz, and interrupting that discussion in person could be fatal. He came to the office 5 minutes later. Kramer gave him the cyanide report. Wolfe sat and asked, "When did Whitmore take the tablet?" "Probably between 11:45 and midnight," Kramer said. "The secretary says he complained of his throat after speaking loudly at dinner." "Who saw him take it?" "No one." "Then the murderer needed only to place the tablet in the box before he entered the study." Kramer nodded. "The box was on Whitmore's desk all evening." "Was the study locked?" "No." "Who entered it?" "Benton during the argument. Lydia Crane twice. Pierce does not exist in this case, so do not ask for him." I smiled. Kramer continued. "Shaw says he went in at 9 to leave account statements. Clara Vance entered around 10:30 looking for Whitmore. Peter Alden claims he never went in. The others deny it." "Then opportunity is abundant," Wolfe said. Kramer took out his cigar, but did not light it. "What matters," Wolfe continued, "is that the fictional guest was given access to the study in the witness's later memories." I checked my notes. Clara had remembered the stranger on the staircase. Cobb placed him in the library. Keane had said, "The stranger disappeared shortly before Whitmore went to the study." Lydia's description put him near the passage leading to it. Wolfe said, "Which witness first suggested the stranger went near the study?" "I traced the chain," Lydia had said. "He stood near the fireplace." Margaret moved him toward the dining room doors. Alden said he crossed the hall. Clara placed him on the stairs. Cobb said he entered the library. Shaw connected him with the accounts. Keene told the police the stranger vanished before midnight. No one directly put him in the study, I said, but together they built a route toward it. Accidentally, Kramer asked. Wolfe shook his head. The route was encouraged. One person repeatedly supplied the next suggestion. Who? I examined the statements again. Lydia told Margaret that the extra guest had arrived. Lydia asked Benton whether Whitmore would announce the manuscript early. Lydia told the maid not to set an extra place, because Whitmore would handle the seating. Lydia was in the passage when Benton left the study. Lydia found the body. Lydia had access to Whitmore's office typewriters and knew about the throat tablets, but Edwin Shaw had supplied the connection to the missing funds. Benton had supplied the supposed conversation in which Whitmore acknowledged the false guest. Any one of them could have shaped the rumor. Lydia Crane is at the beginning of most paths, I said. Wolfe grunted. That makes her informative, not guilty, Kramer said. She had opportunity. So did Mr. Benton. He quarreled with Whitmore and entered the study. He knew of the shortage. He may have forged the signatures. He may also have invented Whitmore's remark about the missing gentleman. Kramer frowned. Which one do you want? I want neither. Desire is not evidence. After Kramer left, Wolfe instructed me to obtain the original accounting documents, the forged payment approvals, and every typewriter ribbon used at Whitmore House during the previous month. That may involve a truck. Use one. What about the witnesses? Interview them again tomorrow. They are beginning to dislike me. Then their judgment is improving. He reached for his beer. I remained at my desk, studying the chain of memories. The grey stranger had begun as a typed instruction. Then a reflection supplied his suit. One witness gave him height, another supplied hair, a third gave him a voice. By midnight he had walked through rooms, criticized a novel, discussed company accounts, and vanished near a murder. No one had planned every detail. They had not needed to. Someone had planted the first certainty and allowed ordinary human confidence to do the rest. Memory had spread through the dinner party like a rumor. Each guest had received it from another, added something personal, and passed it on. Samuel Whitmore's last real conversation had been an argument about stolen money. His last imaginary guest had been created to steal the blame. Chapter 4. The grey suit photographs are often described as honest witnesses. That opinion is usually expressed by people who have never been photographed while chewing. At 9:20 Saturday morning, a messenger from Whitmore House delivered 3 cardboard boxes to the brownstone. They contained photographs taken during Samuel Whitmore's final dinner, together with contact sheets, negatives, and enough publicity material to prove that publishers considered themselves almost as interesting as authors. Wolfe was upstairs with the orchids. Fritz had placed coffee beside my elbow. The office quaffed, and I had 2 hours before Wolfe descended, and expected the photographs to have confessed. The pictures had been taken by Robert Keene, the newspaper columnist. Keene carried a small camera to social gatherings because, as he had explained, a columnist should never rely entirely upon words. He had photographed the guests arriving, standing in the drawing room, sitting at dinner, drinking coffee in the library, and gathering near the terrace doors. Samuel Whitmore appeared in most of them. So did Harold Benton, Lydia Crane, Peter Alden, Margaret Sloane, Dr. Henry Cobb, Clara Vance, Edwin Shaw, and Keene himself whenever someone else had taken the camera. There was no 9th guest. I arranged the contact sheets across the long table. At 7:38, Lydia Crane stood beside the fireplace with Margaret Sloane. Behind them, partly visible in the hall mirror, was the shoulder of a man wearing grey. At 7:41, Peter Alden poured a drink while Harold Benton stood near the window in a grey suit. At 7:46, Benton crossed behind the folding screen where Whitmore's grey jacket had been placed over a chair. At 7:50, Clara Vance spoke with Edwin Shaw near the staircase. A blurred grey figure appeared behind them. At 8:12, everyone sat at the dinner table. There were 8 guests and Samuel Whitmore. No one else occupied a chair. At 9:35, coffee was served in the library. Benton stood near the bookcases. His back was to the camera. At 10:06, he was photographed beside the terrace doors. At 10:23, he appeared in the entrance hall beneath the mirror. his face hidden by the reflection of a lamp. Every location assigned to the imaginary stranger had also been occupied by Harold Benton. That was interesting enough to postpone my coffee. I found a magnifying lens and compared the suit in the photographs with the witnesses' descriptions. Medium grey, narrow lapels, 3 buttons, a faint light stripe, visible only at close range. Benton wore a dark blue tie, exactly as Lydia Crane had first remembered. The height problem also improved. Benton was 5 feet 11. Seen in the hall mirror, which stretched reflections slightly, he could appear over 6 feet. Seen beside the tall bookcases, he seemed shorter. His hair was dark brown with grey at the temples. At a distance it could be called black, brown, or grey, depending upon the witness and the amount of imagination available. The stranger had not merely been constructed from Whitmore's discarded jacket. He had been constructed from Benton. At 11:30 Wolfe entered the office, lowered himself into his chair, and inspected the photographs without touching them. "What have you found?" he asked. "Our missing guest attended after all, but he was already on the guest list." Wolfe looked at me. I placed the contact sheets in sequence. Every place where someone remembers the stranger, Benton appears in a photograph at roughly the same time. Near the fireplace, window, staircase, library shelves, terrace doors, and hall mirror. Wolfe examined the images. "The grey suit," he said, "nearly identical to the one everyone described." "Not nearly. It is the one they described. That is my thought. You occasionally have another." I ignored that. "Benton's height fits most versions. His hair fits all of them if the witnesses were far enough away. He wore a blue tie." Lydia remembered blue. Bell said the voice was sharp and nasal, which is closer to Benton than anyone else in the house. Wolfe selected the photograph taken near the drawing-room window. "Who took this?" "Keene. Where was Mr. Benton's face?" "Turned away." "And this?" "Margaret Sloane took it. Benton is reflected in the mirror." Wolfe leaned back. One real man became 2 because the witnesses were instructed to expect an unknown guest. Whenever they saw Benton at a distance, they classified the image according to that expectation. So Benton was himself and the stranger, in their memories. Did he plan it? That remains uncertain. The doorbell rang. Inspector Kramer entered with Robert Keene and a large envelope. Keene looked offended at having been brought before lunch. Kramer looked as though lunch was one more obstacle in an unreasonable world. Keene placed the envelope on my desk. "Those are the original negatives," he said. "I have already given the police everything." Kramer pointed at the table. "Goodwin thinks the mystery man was Benton." Keene glanced at the photographs. "That is ridiculous." "Why?" "Because I saw both of them in the drawing room." "At the same time?" "Yes." "Where?" Benton stood near the drinks table. The stranger was beside the fireplace. "Could you see the stranger's face?" "No. His back was turned." "What was he wearing?" "A grey suit." I showed him a photograph taken at 7:46. Benton stood near the drinks table. Behind the folding screen, Whitmore's discarded grey jacket appeared in the mirror like the shoulder and back of another man. Keene stared at it. "That is not what I saw." "What did you see that differs?" "He moved. The photographer moved. So did the people reflected around the jacket." Keene picked up the contact sheet. "I would have known the difference between a coat and a man, not after being told to expect a man." Kramer said, "Who took the picture?" "Clara Vance," Keene replied. "Where were you?" "Near the library door." "Then you saw the jacket reflected in the mirror from 30 feet away." Keene's confidence lost a little weight. Wolfe asked, "Mr. Keene, when did you first decide the unknown guest had arrived?" "I saw him before dinner." "Before or after Mr. Benton asked whether you knew the additional guest?" Keene frowned. "Benton asked me shortly after I arrived." "What did he say?" "He nodded toward the drawing room and said, 'Do you know our grey friend?'" The room became quiet. I said, "Exact words?" "Yes." "You did not include that in your first statement?" "I did not consider it important." Kramer used his cigar to indicate the photographs. "It is important now," Keene continued. "I looked toward the drawing room. I saw someone in grey near the fireplace and assumed Benton meant him. Did Benton name the man?" "No." "Did he say the man was a guest?" "Then Benton supplied the suggestion." I said. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "What happened next?" he asked. "I told Margaret Sloane that Whitmore's mystery guest had arrived, and she told Alden." Possibly. Thus, Mr. Benton did not merely resemble the invented stranger. He helped announce him. Keene objected. That does not make him a murderer. No, Wolfe said. It makes him useful. Kramer told Keene to remain available and sent him away. When the front door closed, he looked at Wolfe. Benton argued with Whitmore over missing funds. Benton wore the grey suit. Benton told Keene the grey man had arrived. Benton entered the study. What else do you need? Evidence that he poisoned Whitmore. He had opportunity. So did 6 others. He had motive, shared by anyone implicated in the missing funds or the manuscript. Kramer planted himself in the red leather chair. Are you protecting him because he came here voluntarily? I protect no one. Benton is either the architect of the false guest or the material from which someone else constructed him. I said, someone could have chosen Benton because of the suit. Yes. Who knew what he would wear? That is a better question, Kramer grunted. His tailor, his secretary, household colleagues, and anyone who saw him arrive. That is half the party. Then reduce it. I telephoned Harold Benton and told him Wolfe wanted another conversation. He arrived at 1:15, irritated enough to be prompt. Benton entered the office wearing a navy suit. Kramer remained. Wolfe had postponed lunch by 6 minutes, which meant Benton's future depended upon speed. I placed the photographs before him. You wore this grey suit Tuesday night, I said. He looked at them. Obviously, every witness described the unknown man in the same suit. That is not my responsibility. You asked Robert Keene whether he knew your grey friend. Benton stared at me. I may have made a joke. What joke? There was a grey jacket behind the screen. From the entrance it looked like a man standing there. Keene was always inventing stories about people, so I asked whether he knew the fellow. You knew it was a jacket? Yes. You also knew an additional guest was expected. Lydia had mentioned it. So you combined the jacket with the expected guest and pointed it out to Keene. I was amusing myself. Your amusement created a murder suspect. Benton turned to Wolfe. This is absurd. Wolfe's expression did not alter. Why did you wear grey? He asked. Benton blinked. Because I own the suit. Did anyone suggest it? No. Did Miss Crane know what you intended to wear? She may have seen me at the office that afternoon. I did not change before dinner. Who else saw you? Half the staff. Did Whitmore comment upon the suit? Benton hesitated. He told me. It made me resemble an undertaker. That was before or after your argument. Wolfe leaned back. You were the first guest to confirm that the additional man had arrived. I pointed at jacket. You provided the body for an expectation already planted by the typed note. I did not type. How do you know it was typed? Benton froze. Kramer's eyes sharpened. The newspapers had reported an unnamed extra guest, but they had not described the note. Benton recovered quickly. Keene mentioned it this morning. Kramer said he did not. How would you know? I questioned him before bringing him here. Benton's face reddened. Wolfe said, you knew the note was typed because you saw it, wrote it, or were told its contents by someone who did. Dana may have shown it to me. He denies doing so. Then Lydia told me. Miss Crane told you an additional guest was expected. She did not mention a note. Benton rose. I will not remain here and be trapped by word games. Sit down. Wolfe did not speak loudly, but Benton sat. You argued with Whitmore about missing funds, Wolfe continued. You entered his study and saw the manuscript. You knew his throat tablets were on the desk. You then created an imaginary person who could be blamed for entering that room. I did not poison him. Then why create the man? I did not create him. Samuel did. You previously quoted Whitmore as saying the missing gentleman would prove useful. Did he actually say it? Benton looked at the floor. No. Kramer shifted in his chair. Benton continued. I invented the remark after the murder. I was afraid the police would think I had created the stranger. Had you? No. But I made the joke to Keene. When everyone began remembering a grey man, I understood what had happened. I thought my joke had caused it. So you placed knowledge of the deception in Whitmore's mouth? I said. Yes. Why not tell the police the truth? Because I had argued with Samuel. Because company funds were missing. Because I was wearing the suit everyone described. I looked guilty enough without admitting I had pointed out the imaginary guest. Wolfe studied him. Did you steal the money? No. Did you forge Whitmore's signatures? No. Did you place cyanide in his throat tablet? No. Who knew about your joke before the murder? Keen. Margaret may have overheard. Lydia was nearby. Did anyone encourage it? Benton frowned. Lydia laughed, he said. At what? She said. Then our extra guest has arrived after all. There it was. Again. Lydia Crane at the beginning of the path. Wolfe asked. Did she look toward the jacket or toward you? Benton considered it. Toward me. Kramer said. You expect us to believe Miss Crane confused you with a coat? No. She knew I was there. She was making the same joke. Wolfe's eyes half closed. Benton had supplied the image. Lydia had supplied the certainty. Keene had carried it to the others. A grey jacket became a man. Harold Benton's real figure supplied his movement, height, hair, and voice. Each time someone saw Benton from behind or across a room, memory divided him into two people. Wolfe opened his eyes. You may go, Mr. Benton. Do not leave New York. Benton stood. I was a fool. Yes, Wolfe said. That is common and not yet punishable. After Benton left, Kramer rose. You let him walk. I invited him to do so. He lied about Whitmore's last conversation, to protect himself from suspicion arising from an act of foolishness. He could still be the killer. Certainly. Kramer took his hat and departed, promising to obtain Benton's typewriter samples and financial records. Lunch had been delayed 23 minutes. Wolfe looked toward the door, through which Fritz would soon appear with justified resentment. I gathered the photographs. One real person became two, I said. Benton was remembered as himself when his face was visible, and as the stranger when he was seen from a distance. Yes. But someone needed the stranger to exist before Whitmore died. Yes. Benton made the first joke, and Miss Crane converted the joke into information. She also knew about the note, the manuscript, the throat tablets, and the missing money. Wolfe frowned. You are galloping ahead of your evidence. I have strong legs. You have enthusiasm, which is more dangerous. Fritz entered to announce lunch. Before following him, Wolfe selected one photograph. It showed Lydia Crane near the fireplace, watching Harold Benton's reflection in the mirror. Everyone else in the picture was looking toward Samuel Whitmore. Only Lydia was looking at the man in grey. Wolfe placed the photograph in his desk drawer. The imaginary guest had borrowed Harold Benton's suit, height, hair, and voice. Benton's careless joke had given him life, and 8 uncertain memories had carried him through the house. But the photograph showed someone watching the illusion before the others believed it. The stranger had never existed. Someone, however, had known exactly what he would look like. Chapter 5. The invented guest Saul Panzer came to the brownstone on Monday morning, carrying 3 pages of notes and the expression of a man who had found something useful without becoming excited about it. That was Saul. If he discovered a tiger in the kitchen, he would first check whether Fritz had invited it. Wolfe was upstairs with the orchids, so Saul sat in the yellow chair while I poured coffee. Outside, New York was starting the week with horns, wet pavement, and the unreasonable belief that everyone should be somewhere else. What did you find? I asked. Harold Benton did more than point out the grey jacket before dinner. I suspected he had more talent. After Whitmore's body was found, Benton asked at least 5 people whether they knew the man in the grey suit. That stopped the coffee halfway to my mouth. 5? Possibly 6. The guests were kept in the drawing room while the police were called. Benton moved among them. What exactly did he say? It varied. To Margaret Sloane, he said. Who was the fellow in grey? To Dr. Cobb, he asked whether Whitmore had introduced the tall man. He told Edwin Shaw that the grey-suited stranger had disappeared. Robert Keene remembers Benton asking whether anyone had seen the man leave. Before the police interviewed them, yes. That was more than a careless joke. A joke before dinner could plant a possibility. Repetition after murder could turn it into testimony. Where did you get this? From the guests, separately. I avoided using the phrase grey suit until they did. Saul handed me the notes. Margaret Sloane remembered Benton asking the question within 5 minutes of Lydia Crane finding the body. Dr. Cobb heard it moments later. Edwin Shaw said Benton had spoken, as though the stranger's presence were already established. Robert Keene admitted that his first certainty came not from what he had seen but from Benton's question. Clara Vance recalled something better. After the body was found, she had asked whether anyone should search the upper floors. Benton replied, "The man in grey may still be in the house." That supplied the stranger with more than existence. It supplied guilt. At 11:30 the elevator hummed and Wolfe entered. He crossed to his desk, settled into his chair and looked at Saul's report. Saul repeated what he had told me. Wolfe listened with his eyes closed. When Saul finished, Wolfe opened them and extended a hand. I gave him the notes. He read each page. "Mr. Benton asked the question before anyone publicly described such a man," Wolfe said. "Yes," Saul replied. "Did he claim to have spoken with him?" "No. He said he had seen him near the drawing room and later near the study passage." "That second location is new," I said. Wolfe glanced at me. "Not new, convenient." He placed the notes on his desk. Before dinner, Mr. Benton pointed toward Whitmore's grey jacket and invited Mr. Keene to interpret it as a man. After the murder, he repeated the interpretation until it became communal property. "Then Benton invented the guest," I said. "He propagated him. Invention may have begun elsewhere. Because Lydia Crane told the servants an extra guest was expected. Because someone typed the note before Benton made his joke. Mr. Benton supplied a body to an idea already prepared." Saul said, "He may have typed the note, possibly, but if he planned the fiction, his repeated questions were clumsy." "Panic makes people clumsy," I said. "True. It also makes innocent men appear industrious." The doorbell rang. Harold Benton had not been invited, but he arrived anyway. He had telephoned twice that morning, asking to speak with Wolfe. I had told him Wolfe's schedule was sacred. Benton apparently believed his own situation outranked religion. I admitted him and put him in the red leather chair. He looked worse than he had 2 days earlier. His face had lost color, his collar seemed too large, and he avoided the photograph of himself in the grey suit lying on Wolfe's desk. Wolfe said, "You have something to add?" Benton glanced at Saul. "Who is he, Mr. Panzer? Answer the question." Benton placed both hands on his knees. "I have learned the police believe I created the unknown guest. You helped," I made a joke, "before dinner. After the murder you conducted a campaign." Benton stared at him. Wolfe gave him Saul's list. "You asked Miss Sloane who the grey man was. You asked Dr. Cobb whether Whitmore had introduced him. You told Mr. Shaw he had disappeared. You suggested to Miss Vance that he might still be in the house." Benton's eyes moved across the page. "People were frightened. So were you." "Yes. Why?" "Samuel was dead. I had argued with him. The company accounts showed a shortage. I had pointed out the false man before dinner. I knew how it would look. It looked like murder." Benton stood and crossed to the window. "I did not intend to make them remember him." "What did you intend?" "To determine whether anyone else had seen what I thought I had seen." "You knew you had seen a jacket?" "By then, yes." "Then why ask about a man?" Benton turned. "Because after Samuel died, I began doubting myself. I thought perhaps there had been a man as well as the jacket." "That is nonsense," I said. "You admitted you made the first remark as a joke." He looked at me. "Have you never repeated a story until you became uncertain which part happened?" "I work for Mr. Wolfe. Uncertainty is provided professionally." Wolfe's voice sharpened. "Sit down." Benton obeyed. "You knew there were only 8 invited guests," Wolfe said. "You knew the figure near the screen was a jacket. Yet after Whitmore's death, you asked questions that assumed the stranger existed. Why?" Benton's hands tightened. "I wanted the police to look elsewhere. There it was, plain and ugly." "Because you killed Whitmore?" Wolfe asked. "No." "Because you stole the money?" "No." "Then what were you concealing?" Benton swallowed. "Samuel intended to remove me from Whitmore House." I picked up my pencil. "He told you during the argument?" "Yes." "He blamed me for the missing funds even though I had not taken them. He said the announcement at midnight would prove I was incompetent, if not dishonest. He planned to place Lydia in control of the company." "Did Miss Crane know?" Wolfe asked. "I believe so. Why?" "Her employment agreement had been revised. I saw a copy in Samuel's desk." "What did it provide?" "A share of the company and authority over financial operations if Samuel died or became incapacitated. That gave Lydia Crane a better reason to remain near the study than secretarial loyalty." "Did you take the agreement?" I asked. "No." "Did you take the private ledger?" "No." "Did you poison the throat tablet?" "No." Wolfe regarded Benton. Then your conduct was cowardly rather than murderous. You encouraged belief in an imaginary suspect because you feared the truth would make you a real one. Benton's face hardened. I was protecting the company. Pafui, you were protecting Harold Benton. No one said anything for several seconds. Wolfe continued. Who first referred to the unknown guest after the body was found? Benton looked toward the floor. Lydia, what did she say? She came out of the study and said Samuel was dead. Clara began crying. Keene asked whether anyone had left the house. Lydia said, the man in grey is gone. Saul and I exchanged a glance. Exact words? Wolfe asked. As near as I can remember. What did you do? I looked toward the fireplace. The jacket was still behind the screen. I asked Margaret whether she knew the man Lydia meant. So Miss Crane supplied the first post-murder assertion. Yes. Why did you repeat it? Because it offered another explanation. For Whitmore's death? For everything. Wolfe leaned back. Did Miss Crane ever speak directly with the supposed stranger? She claimed she had. Did you see her do so? No. Did anyone? Not that I know. Wolfe dismissed Benton after warning him not to discuss the grey guest with anyone again. Benton said that would not be difficult, since the police had threatened to charge him with obstruction if he mentioned the subject. When the door closed, I said, Lydia starts it before dinner and starts it again after the murder. Yes. She told the staff another guest was expected. She told Margaret and Benton. She saw Benton's grey suit. After the body was found, she declared the man was gone. Yes. She also found Whitmore had access to his throat tablets, knew about the missing money, and stood to gain control of the company. Wolfe frowned. You are assembling a gallows before identifying the carpenter, Saul said. Benton may be shifting blame. Certainly, Wolfe replied. But facts do not become false merely because a frightened man reports them. I went to the telephone and called Inspector Kramer. He arrived 40 minutes later, carrying his cigar and his usual suspicion that we had enjoyed ourselves without him. Wolfe gave him Saul's findings. Kramer read the notes and grunted. So Benton admits planting the stranger. He admits encouraging the belief, Wolfe said. That is the same thing. No, the typed note existed before his joke. Miss Crane knew of the expected guest before Benton supplied a grey figure. Someone prepared the ground. Benton merely trampled it. Kramer turned to me. You have been talking to Lydia. Not since Saturday. Good. I want her at headquarters. Wolfe said, bring her here first. Kramer's face darkened. This is a homicide investigation, not one of your dinner parties. Miss Crane will speak more freely here. She may also lie more freely. That is desirable. A lie is useful when properly examined. Kramer disagreed in language not suitable for the orchids, but he telephoned Lydia Crane. She arrived at 3:15. Lydia entered wearing black and carrying a leather document case. She saw Saul, Kramer, and the photograph of Benton in grey on Wolfe's desk. Her eyes paused on the picture for half a second. Wolfe indicated the red chair. Sit, she sat. You stated after Mr. Whitmore's death that the man in grey had disappeared. Her expression remained composed. I may have. You were the first to say it. I do not remember, Mr. Benton does. That does not make it true. Did you see the stranger leave? No. Did you see him arrive? I believed I saw him near the fireplace. You saw Mr. Whitmore's jacket reflected in the mirror, and Mr. Benton moving nearby. That is your interpretation. No. It is established by photographs. Wolfe placed 3 images before her. In each, Benton's grey figure or Whitmore's jacket occupied the position later assigned to the stranger. You knew Mr. Benton, Wolfe said. You had worked with him for years. How did you mistake him for an unknown man? I saw him from behind. Then why did you claim the stranger spoke to you? Lydia's lips parted. Wolfe continued. You described a deep voice asking about Whitmore's midnight announcement. No witness saw that conversation. Did it occur? She looked at Kramer. Am I accused? You are questioned? Kramer said. That conversation did not occur, Wolfe said. You invented it after the murder to give the false guest knowledge of Whitmore's plan. Lydia's hands closed around the document case. I was confused. No, confusion is disorderly. Your statements were purposeful. She stood. I will answer further questions through an attorney. Before you leave, Wolfe said, who typed the note announcing an additional guest? I do not know. The damaged lowercase e matches no household machine. It was produced at Whitmore House. You had access to every editorial office. So did hundreds of employees, not on Tuesday evening. Her face changed slightly. Kramer saw it too. Wolfe said, "The building entry records show that you returned to the publishing office at 5:10 that afternoon and remained for 20 minutes. You told Mr. Benton you had forgotten a contract. Did you type the note then?" "No." "What did you retrieve?" "A personnel file." "Whose? Mine?" "The revised agreement giving you control of Whitmore House upon Samuel Whitmore's death." "Lydia's." Control slipped. That agreement was Samuel's decision. Indeed, it gives you motive to protect him, not kill him, unless the private ledger threatened to expose you. I did not kill him. Then tell us who created the imaginary guest. She looked from Wolfe to Kramer. "Harold Benton." "That answer is inadequate." He pointed out the jacket. "He wore the grey suit." He repeated the question. "And you supplied the certainty." I repeated what I believed. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "You did not believe it. You created it." Lydia picked up her case. "I have nothing more to say." Kramer allowed her to leave only after arranging for a policeman to accompany her to headquarters. When the door shut, he turned to Wolfe. "You think she did it?" "I think she planted the original idea. That is not murder, no. But the fictional guest was created to perform two tasks. He was to steal the manuscript and poison Whitmore." Kramer said, "The tablet could have been planted hours earlier." "Precisely. The murderer needed the police to believe an unknown man entered the study and removed the manuscript after Whitmore's death. Miss Crane's invented conversation gave him knowledge of the midnight announcement. Mr. Benton's questions gave him general acceptance. I said, Benton did the murderer's work without knowing it." "People often do," Wolfe replied. "Suggestion requires assistance from those eager to explain what frightens them." Saul asked, "What now?" Wolfe looked at the forged payment authorizations stacked on my desk. "Now we determine whose interests were threatened by the private ledger. The missing funds, the manuscript, and the invented guest are not separate puzzles. They are one design." He selected the photograph, showing Lydia Crane watching Benton's reflection. "The stranger was planted before the murder, strengthened after it, and perfected during the police interviews. He was not a man. He was an instruction. An instruction to do what?" I asked. "To look away from the dinner table." The office fell quiet. 8 real guests had eaten with Samuel Whitmore. One of them had poisoned him. Another had spread a lie from fear. Others had supplied details from vanity, confusion, and suggestion. By morning they had created a 9th guest more vivid than any of them. The police had searched for a tall stranger in grey. The murderer had remained exactly where Wolfe now wanted us to look. Among the invited guests. Chapter 6. The financial motive. Money can disappear in several ways. It may be spent, stolen, misplaced, invested, or entrusted to a man who knows enough bookkeeping to make all 4 look alike. Saul Panzer proved that Harold Benton belonged to the final class. He arrived at the brownstone shortly after 11 on Tuesday morning, carrying a black document case. Wolfe was still upstairs with the orchids, where a new spray of odontoglossum had demanded attention more urgently than $600,000 missing dollars. I put Saul in the yellow chair and opened the document case. Inside were bank statements, payment authorizations, company records, cancelled checks, and a chart linking Whitmore House to 5 corporations that appeared to exist, mainly because paper was cheaper than honesty. "Who owns them?" I asked. "Harold Benton," Saul said. "Directly. Not directly enough for a jury without explanation. 2 are controlled through nominees. 1 belongs to Benton's brother-in-law. Another was created by a former Whitmore House clerk. The 5th lists an address that turns out to be an empty office above a shoe store. How much? $612,000 over 27 months. I whistled. Saul never whistles. He merely waited. The scheme was tidy. Whitmore House had paid large sums to outside firms for manuscript evaluation, international rights advice, printing consultation, and promotional research. The services were either invented or greatly inflated. Benton approved most of the invoices. Samuel Whitmore's signature appeared on the final payment forms. The signatures were excellent copies. At 11:30, Wolfe entered, settled behind his desk, and looked at the papers. "Report," he said. Saul gave it without decoration. Wolfe examined the chart. "Mr. Benton controlled all 5 companies.
Yes, could
Whitmore have authorized the arrangement, not unless he enjoyed stealing from himself and hiding the money from his personal accounts. Some men do. Whitmore did not. 3 weeks ago, he hired an independent auditor without telling Benton. That connected with the argument. What did the auditor find? I asked. The shell companies, duplicate invoices, and forged approvals. Whitmore received the preliminary report 4 days before the dinner. Wolfe leaned back. And the upcoming board meeting? Scheduled for Monday morning. Whitmore planned to present the report, remove Benton as partner, and ask the district attorney to investigate. Who knew? The auditor. Whitmore, Lydia Crane, and Benton. I said. Benton knew he was finished. He knew enough, Saul replied. Whitmore sent him a memorandum demanding explanations for 11 transfers. Benton received it the afternoon before the dinner. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Obtained the memorandum. Saul took a copy from the case. It was short and unpleasant. Harold. The accounts have now been traced. Your explanations have been false. On Monday, I shall place the complete record before the board. Before then, you will return every company document and surrender access to all banking facilities. SW. Below Whitmore's initials was a handwritten sentence. The private ledger will establish the rest. I read it twice. The private ledger was not merely a book manuscript, I said. No, Wolfe replied. Or not only one. Saul explained that Whitmore had used the proposed publication as cover. The manuscript exposed corruption in several industries, but its financial appendix included examples drawn from Whitmore House. Benton's companies, false invoices and forged approvals, had been disguised under initials in the working draft. At midnight, I said, Whitmore planned to announce that Benton was one of the men exposed. Possibly, Wolfe said. Or he intended to make Benton identify himself by reacting to the announcement. The doorbell rang before we could improve that theory. Inspector Kramer entered with Edwin Shaw, the company accountant. Shaw looked as though he had been pushed into the taxi and had not stopped objecting internally. Kramer dropped into the red leather chair. Panzer found Benton's companies. So have we, Wolfe said. Kramer looked annoyed that facts had arrived without police escort. Shaw sat near my desk and removed his glasses. I should have discovered it sooner, he said. Yes, Wolfe replied. Shaw blinked. Wolfe continued. Self-reproach is unproductive unless it supplies information. When did you first suspect Mr. Benton? 3 months ago. The consulting fees were rising, but no reports were reaching my department. What did you do? I asked Mr. Benton. He said the contracts were confidential. And then, I asked Mr. Whitmore, who told you? He said he would investigate personally. Did Benton learn that you had spoken? Shaw looked uncomfortable. Yes. Miss Crane accidentally mentioned it in his presence. Kramer grunted. Another accident involving Lydia Crane. Shaw continued. Benton came to my office and warned me that questioning a partner could end my career. Did you tell Whitmore? Yes. When? The night of the dinner. That was new. What time? I asked. About 9:15. I entered the study with the account summaries. Mr. Whitmore said the matter would be settled before midnight. Did he name Benton? No, he said. The guilty man had already prepared his own confession. Wolfe's eyes opened wider. What? Confession? The records, Mr. Whitmore said. Every false company eventually led back to the same person. Was the private ledger on the desk? Yes. A thick sealed packet. Did you touch Whitmore's throat tablets? No. Did you see anyone else near the silver box? Shaw hesitated. Harold Benton, he said. He was standing behind the desk when I entered. Kramer leaned forward. Doing what? Looking at a paper. He put it down quickly. Where was Whitmore? By the window. Was the silver box on the desk? Yes. Could Benton have touched it? I suppose so. That gave Benton opportunity before the argument officially began. Wolfe asked. Did Mr. Benton know you had seen him there? Yes. He told me I had entered without knocking. What happened next? Mr. Whitmore returned to the desk. Benton said the payments had been authorized and that the investigation was an insult. Mr. Whitmore called him a thief. Exact word, yes. Then Mr. Whitmore told me to leave. I heard them shouting after the door closed. Shaw had nothing more, so Kramer sent him away under Pearlie Stebbins's supervision. When the front door shut, Kramer pointed his cigar at Wolfe. There is your murderer. Benton stole $600,000, Whitmore found out. Benton had access to the tablets. He invented the extra guest and pushed the story after the murder. An attractive arrangement, Wolfe said. You do not sound attracted. I distrust arrangements that arrive already tied with ribbon. Kramer rose. We have motive, opportunity, lies, and obstruction. You lack the manuscript. We will find it. You also lack the typewriter that produced the note. Benton had access to the publishing office. So did Miss Crane. Kramer's face hardened. You spent yesterday suggesting she created the stranger. I suggested she strengthened him. Now Benton did it. Several people participated. Only one understood the purpose. Kramer left to obtain a warrant for Benton's home and office. Saul followed, intending to locate the missing auditor's working files. I remained with Wolfe. You still think Lydia may be the killer? I think Miss Crane lied about seeing the stranger and invented a conversation with him. Benton invented Whitmore's last remark and repeated the grey man story after the murder. Yes. They both lied for different reasons. That is common. A murder is often surrounded by innocent lies competing with the guilty one. I studied the payment records. Benton had the motive. If Whitmore exposed him Monday, he lost the company, the money, and his freedom. Indeed, the invented guest gave him an outsider. He pointed at Whitmore's jacket, used his own grey suit to reinforce the image, and asked everyone about the stranger after the murder. Yes. What more do you need? A plan that functions. This one did. Temporarily. Wolfe poured beer and watched the foam rise. Consider the sequence, Archie. Before dinner, a typed note announced an additional guest. Mr. Benton then called attention to a grey figure. After the murder, he repeatedly asked about the man in grey. The witnesses supplied contradictory memories, but all accepted his existence. That was the plan. Was it? He drank. I waited because Wolfe enjoyed making the obvious feel expensive. If Mr. Benton intended the stranger to be blamed, Wolfe said, the stranger required an action. He must be seen entering the study, handling the tablets, taking the manuscript, or leaving the house. The witnesses moved him toward the study. Collectively and vaguely, no one saw him enter it. No one saw him touch Whitmore's belongings. No servant admitted him, no coat belonged to him, no photograph contained him. The fiction collapsed under the first orderly examination. Benton counted on confusion. A man capable of concealing theft for 2 years would not depend entirely upon 8 people inventing the same useful lie. He did not need the same lie. He needed an outsider. An outsider with no physical trace would direct suspicion back toward the guests. That was the flaw. The false man had impressed Kramer for one morning. But the absence of footprints, coat, place setting, photograph, or exit made him less useful every hour. Once disproved, the deception became evidence of planning by someone inside the house, I said. Then the imaginary guest was never intended to survive investigation. Perhaps, what was he intended to do? To consume time. The phrase hung there. Wolfe continued. The police spent the first hours searching stations, hotels, streets, and criminal records for a man in grey. Meanwhile, someone had time to remove evidence, alter company books, hide the manuscript, or create an alibi. Benton? Likely. But you are not satisfied. No, the telephone rang. It was Saul. Kramer's men had reached Benton's office before he did. They found a locked drawer containing duplicate invoices, forged signature samples, and correspondence from 2 shell companies. Benton's home safe contained $38,000 in cash. There was no manuscript. More important, a secretary at Whitmore House had identified the typewriter used for the note. It belonged to a small conference room on the executive floor. Who used the room Tuesday? I asked. Benton held a meeting there at 4, Saul said. Lydia Crane entered at 5:20 and remained 9 minutes. No one else signed for the room. Could either have typed the note? Yes. What was Lydia doing there? She says she collected a personnel folder. We had heard that before. After I hung up, Wolfe instructed me to bring Benton to the brownstone. Benton arrived at 5:10 with an attorney named Paul Ransom. Ransom was thin, sharp, and eager to prevent Benton from answering anything useful. Wolfe solved that by telling him he could remain silent along with his client. Benton sat in the red chair. Wolfe placed the Shell Company chart before him. You diverted $612,000 from Whitmore House. Ransom said, My client denies criminal intent. I did not ask his intention. Benton stared at the chart. Those companies provided services. Name the services. Market analysis. Rights research. Produce the reports. They were verbal. All 5 companies reported verbally. Ransom intervened again. Wolfe ignored him. Mr. Whitmore discovered the fraud, Wolfe said. He intended to expose you at Monday's board meeting. On Tuesday night, he called you a thief. Benton's face had gone grey. He misunderstood the transactions. You forged his signatures. No, the original forms used for tracing were found in your office. Benton looked at Ransom. Wolfe continued. You also encouraged belief in a non-existent guest. I have explained that. You have admitted fear, not purpose. Why did you repeatedly ask about the man in grey? I panicked. Why did you know the note announcing an extra guest was typed? Lydia told me. She denies it. She is lying. That is possible. Did she type the note? Benton's eyes shifted. I do not know. Did you? No. Who poisoned Whitmore? I do not know. Who took the manuscript? I do not know. You are remarkably ignorant regarding events organized for your benefit. Ransom rose. This interview is over. Wolfe looked at Benton. Mr. Whitmore told Edwin Shaw that the guilty man had prepared his own confession. He referred to the financial records contained in the private ledger. You knew that manuscript would destroy you. Benton stood too quickly and struck the chair with the back of his knee. I never saw the manuscript. That was another mistake. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. You saw it on Whitmore's desk during your argument. I saw a sealed packet. You described its title to the police. Benton's mouth opened, then closed. Kramer's first report had not included that fact publicly. Only Benton, Shaw, and Lydia had admitted seeing the title. Ransom took Benton by the arm. They left without another word. When the front door shut, I said, he is guilty. Of theft, certainly, and murder, possibly. You keep protecting the possibility. I protect reason from impatience. Fritz entered with a tray containing beer and small pastry shells filled with mushrooms and herbs. Wolfe inspected one before eating it. I returned to the photographs. Benton's grey suit appeared in every room where the stranger was later remembered. His question after the murder had spread through the guests. His financial ruin had been hours away. His access to the study and throat tablets was established. The case seemed to fit him as neatly as the grey suit. Yet Wolfe had found the fatal flaw. A murderer creating an imaginary outsider should have supplied proof that the outsider entered and escaped. Benton had supplied only questions. The stranger could not withstand photographs, servants, or account of the place settings. The invention had not been built to deceive forever. It had been built to delay. During that delay, someone had accomplished something more important than avoiding suspicion. The question was what? Chapter 7. The impossible timeline, a timetable, is merely a row of numbers until Nero Wolfe dislikes one of them. Then it becomes a weapon. On Wednesday morning, the long table in Wolfe's office was covered with photographs, police statements, household records, and a floor plan of Samuel Whitmore's townhouse. I had marked every reported sighting of the man in grey with a red pencil. The page looked as if the imaginary guest had spent the evening racing through walls. Wolfe sat behind his desk with his first bottle of beer. Inspector Kramer occupied the red leather chair. Saul Panzer sat near the globe. I stood beside the table because someone had to perform the physical labor while the great minds remained comfortable. Begin, Wolfe said. I pointed to the first photograph. 7:38. Lydia Crane and Margaret Sloane are near the fireplace. Lydia later claims she saw the unknown man behind them. Who was actually there? Wolfe asked. Harold Benton. His shoulder appears in the hall mirror. I moved to the next picture. 7:41. Peter Alden is pouring a drink. He remembers the stranger near the window. Mr. Benton, standing at the window in his grey suit. At 7:46, Robert Keane says he saw Benton beside the drinks table and the stranger near the fireplace. Kramer leaned forward. That is the one sighting where both men were supposedly present. No, I said. Keane saw Benton and Whitmore's grey jacket reflected behind the folding screen, he admitted. He never saw the stranger's face or hands. Wolfe tapped the desk with one finger. Therefore, even the alleged simultaneous sighting contains only one man. At 7:50, Clara Vance and Edwin Shaw were photographed near the staircase. A blurred grey figure crossed behind them. Clara later called it the stranger. The negative showed Benton's face in profile. At 8:12, the dining room photograph contained Samuel Whitmore and 8 guests. Every chair was visible. No place had been set for a 9th visitor. At 9:15, Edwin Shaw entered the study carrying account summaries. He found Benton behind Whitmore's desk. The silver throat tablet box stood within Benton's reach. At 9:35, Dr. Henry Cobb remembered the grey man examining a book in the library. A photograph showed Benton standing beside the same shelves. At 9:45, Benton and Whitmore argued privately in the study. Voices were heard in the passage. At 10:06, Margaret Sloane remembered seeing the unknown man beside the terrace doors. Benton was photographed there. At 10:23, Clara Vance saw a grey figure pass beneath the entrance hall mirror. Again, Benton occupied the photograph. Wolfe looked at Kramer. Every sighting occurred where Mr. Benton was present. Kramer removed his cigar from his mouth. People saw him. That does not prove they thought he was someone else. Individually, no. Collectively, yes. Wolfe indicated the witness statements. Not one person saw the unknown man's face clearly. Not one touched him. Not one introduced himself. Their descriptions of his voice came from conversations that no one else heard. Those imaginary conversations reflected the witness's own concerns. He turned toward me. Miss Crane? She remembered him asking about Whitmore's midnight announcement. Mr. Alden. He remembered criticism of his latest novel. Mr. Shaw. A question about independent audits. Miss Sloane, he supposedly asked where Peter Alden was. Wolfe grunted. They did not remember a man. They assigned their private anxieties to a vacant shape. Kramer said, Benton may have supplied the shape without planning murder. He did more. Wolfe looked at Saul. Saul opened a notebook. After Whitmore's body was found at 12:15, Benton spoke to 5 guests within 9 minutes. At 12:17, he asked Margaret Sloane who the man in grey was. At 12:19, he asked Dr. Cobb whether Whitmore had introduced the stranger. At 12:21, he told Edwin Shaw the stranger had disappeared. At 12:24, he asked Keene whether anyone had seen the man leave. At 12:26, he warned Clara Vance that the man might still be in the house. Kramer frowned. 9 minutes, Wolfe said. The guests were frightened, confined together, and eager for an explanation. Mr. Benton offered one in the form of questions. I said, he never said, I saw the killer. He made each person think someone else had seen him. Precisely. A direct assertion invites challenge. A question invites assistance. Kramer stood and went to the table. What about Lydia Crane? She said. The man in grey was gone before Benton started asking questions. Miss Crane participated, Wolfe replied. She had heard Mr. Benton's joke before dinner. After the body was discovered, she repeated the false interpretation. Her motive was self-protection. Protection from what? She knew of the financial shortage. She knew Whitmore intended to give her control of the firm. She feared suspicion would fall upon her. The imagined stranger offered relief, and she accepted it. So Benton Crane planned the story together? No. Mr. Benton planted it deliberately. Miss Crane strengthened it out of fear. Kramer returned to his chair. You still have not proved murder. The timeline proves. Preparation. How? Mr. Benton pointed out the supposed grey stranger before Whitmore died. He encouraged belief in that stranger immediately afterward. Therefore, he anticipated the need for an unknown suspect. He could have panicked. Before the murder, Kramer said nothing. I placed the study photographs on top of the others. At 9:15, Benton had stood behind the desk close to Whitmore's silver box. The laboratory had found a faint scrape on the underside of the lid. One throat tablet had been replaced by a tablet containing cyanide beneath a coating of harmless medicine. Whitmore had not swallowed it until shortly before midnight. He took it with mineral water after returning to the study. Kramer pointed at the report. Benton could not know which tablet Whitmore would choose. Wolfe shook his head. The box had contained 6 tablets. The poison was placed beneath the others. Kramer looked at him. The bottom tablet? Yes. Whitmore habitually tilted the box and took the lowest tablet through the narrow opening rather than removing the lid. Miss Crane confirmed the habit. Mr. Benton had observed him for years. I had tested the box myself. When tilted, only the lowest tablet slid toward the opening, Wolfe continued. Benton placed the poisoned tablet at the bottom, while alone near the desk. The harmless tablets above it were consumed or transferred during the evening until the cyanide tablet reached the opening. Kramer's cigar stopped halfway to his mouth. That is why the timing mattered. Yes, Benton knew Whitmore's throat would trouble him. After a long dinner and an argument, he expected the tablet to be taken near midnight, and the water merely the means by which Whitmore swallowed it. The poison was in the tablet, not the glass. Kramer paced once across the office. Suppose Benton did it. Why invent a man who could not survive investigation? To gain the first hours, Wolfe picked up the police activity report. From 12:30 until nearly 4 in the morning, officers searched the house, surrounding streets, railway terminals, hotels, and taxi records for a tall man in grey. Photographs of known criminals were brought to the witnesses. The invited guests were questioned chiefly about the stranger rather than their own movements. Benton needed time for what? I asked. Though I knew Wolfe wanted it, Saul answered. To alter the financial records. He placed 2 ledgers on the table. During the confusion after Whitmore's death, Benton had telephoned the night watchman at Whitmore House. He claimed police would arrive to inspect company files and ordered the watchman to open the executive offices. At 2:20 in the morning, Benton left the townhouse for 43 minutes. His absence had been recorded as a trip to notify Whitmore's board chairman. Instead, a taxi driver had taken him to the publishing office. Several files were missing when police arrived later that morning. Carbon copies of false invoices had been burned in a basement furnace. One ledger had been altered to shift approval of the shell company payments towards Samuel Whitmore and Lydia Crane. Kramer read Saul's report. The invented guest was a delay. Yes, Wolfe said. A temporary fiction was sufficient. Mr. Benton did not need the stranger to withstand careful analysis. He needed him to occupy the police until the most dangerous financial papers were removed. And the manuscript? Kramer asked. Also taken during those 43 minutes. Kramer looked up. The private ledger was at the townhouse. Was it? Edwin Shaw and Harold Benton had seen a sealed packet on Whitmore's desk. Neither had opened it. Lydia Crane had seen Whitmore place a package in the drawer before dinner, but she had not inspected its contents. The packet was a copy, Wolfe said. Whitmore had sent the completed manuscript to his office safe that afternoon. Mr. Benton knew this because he had seen the office messenger's receipt. So he killed Whitmore, created the stranger, left the house during the confusion, and stole the real manuscript. Yes, Kramer studied the timeline. Why return? To maintain the appearance of cooperation and learn whether the false guest had been accepted, I said. When Benton returned, everyone was already repeating his questions as memories. Indeed, Wolfe placed the photographs in a single row. Mr. Benton's fatal error was vanity. He assumed he could control the fiction because he had supplied its first shape. But each witness altered it. Height, hair, voice, position, and conversation changed. The contradictions proved the man had not been observed independently. Kramer asked, "Why does that identify Benton rather than Crane?" Because the false man never appeared independently of Benton. Every sighting was either Mr. Benton himself, his reflection, or Whitmore's jacket positioned near him. Miss Crane spread the rumor, but she did not create its physical basis. False. Wolfe picked up the photograph showing Lydia watching Benton's reflection. She believed the false guest because she already feared the real ones. Benton knew the truth because he designed it. The room became quiet. Outside, tires whispered over the damp pavement of West 35th Street. Fritz passed through the hall on his way to the kitchen, where lunch was being prepared with more reliability than police testimony. Kramer said, "I can arrest Benton for fraud and destruction of records. Murder is still circumstantial. Then do not arrest him yet." Kramer stared. "You have spent an hour giving me the case. I have given you its structure. I require the final piece." "What piece?" "The manuscript," Saul said. Benton may have destroyed it. No, he stole money for 2 years because he valued money. The manuscript contains information concerning other corrupt men and companies. To Mr. Benton, it is not merely dangerous, it is valuable. Blackmail, I said, or continued protection. Wolfe instructed me to summon all 8 guests to the brownstone the following evening. Charles Danner, Alice Dunn, and Edwin Shaw were also to attend. Kramer objected to the size of the gathering, the location, and the implication that Wolfe intended to perform his work for him. Wolfe ignored all 3 objections. After Kramer and Saul left, I began making telephone calls. Wolfe remained behind his desk, eyes closed and fingers resting on the chair arms. The timeline is complete, I said. No. What is missing? The moment at which Mr. Benton learned the manuscript was not in Whitmore's study. During his trip to the office? Yes. Until then, he believed the packet in the desk was genuine. How does that help us? It gives us knowledge possessed only by the murderer. I understood. At the gathering, Wolfe would claim that the real manuscript had never left Whitmore's study. If Benton corrected him, he would identify himself as the man who had opened the packet and later stolen the true copy. I looked again at the photographs. For hours, 8 witnesses had been certain a tall stranger in grey moved among them. In reality, every sighting belonged to Harold Benton. The stranger had his suit, his build, his movements, and fragments of his voice. The 2 men had never been seen together because there had never been 2 men. What began as a suggestion had become a shared certainty. The next evening, Wolfe intended to turn that certainty back upon the man who had created it. Chapter 8. Wolfe's final explanation. At 8:55 the next evening, Wolfe's office contained 8 dinner guests, 3 servants, 2 policemen, 1 private detective, 1 assistant private detective, and no mysterious man in a grey suit. That last absence made it the most accurate gathering of the week. Harold Benton occupied the red leather chair. He had arrived with his attorney, Paul Ransom, who sat immediately behind him and looked ready to object if anyone breathed in a legally questionable manner. Lydia Crane sat near the bookshelves in a black dress, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Peter Alden, Margaret Sloan, Dr. Henry Cobb, Clara Vance, Edwin Shaw, and Robert Keane filled the remaining chairs. Charles Danner and Alice Dunn stood near the door. Inspector Kramer had planted himself beside Wolfe's desk. Pearlie Stebbins guarded the hall. Saul Panzer waited in the front room with instructions to appear when called. The photographs from Whitmore's dinner were arranged across the long table. Beside them lay the Shell Company records, the forged payment approvals, the medical examiner's report, and the silver box that had contained Samuel Whitmore's throat tablets. Wolfe entered at 9 exactly. He crossed to his custom-made chair, sat and looked around the office. His gaze paused on Benton for a moment before continuing. "All are present?" he asked. "All the real people," I said. Kramer grunted. Benton's attorney frowned. Wolfe ignored both. "We are assembled," Wolfe began, "because Samuel Whitmore invited 8 guests to dinner and was murdered before midnight. The police were then asked to seek a 9th guest, a tall man in grey who had no name, no coat, no place at the table, no image in any photograph, and no independent witness to his arrival." Robert Keane shifted in his chair. "I saw him," he said. "No," Wolfe replied. "You saw a grey jacket reflected in a mirror and Mr. Benton standing nearby. You combined those images because you had been told to expect an additional guest." Keane opened his mouth, but Wolfe raised a finger. "Each of you believed you had seen the stranger." Miss Crane placed him near the fireplace. Miss Sloane remembered him by the dining room doors. Mr. Alden recalled a conversation in the library. Dr. Cobb placed him near the bookcases. Miss Vance saw him on the staircase. Mr. Shaw remembered him discussing financial audits. Mr. Keane believed he watched the room in silence. Wolfe turned toward the photographs. Yet the man differed with every telling. He was 5'10", 6 feet, or 6'3". His hair was black-brown, grey, or nearly absent. He spoke with a deep voice, a nasal voice, a soft voice, or an accent. He wore a blue tie, a maroon tie, or none. Peter Alden said memory is imperfect. Indeed, that imperfection was the murderer's principal tool. Wolfe selected a photograph showing Harold Benton near the drawing-room window. The stranger's appearance came from Mr. Benton. He wore a grey suit. His height and build matched the general description. His dark hair was grey at the temples. Whenever he was seen from a distance, in a mirror, or with his face turned away, the witnesses could divide him into two people. Benton's attorney leaned forward. My client cannot be blamed because other people confused him with an imaginary man. He can be blamed for creating the confusion, Wolfe said. Ransom started to object, but Benton lifted a hand. Let him talk, Wolfe obliged. Before dinner, a typed note was placed on the hall table. It instructed the household to expect one additional guest who might arrive without introduction. The servants prepared for him. Miss Crane repeated the information to several guests. Lydia Crane looked at Wolfe. I did not type the note. No, you did not. That surprised her. It also surprised Kramer, though he concealed it behind his cigar. Wolfe continued. The note was typed in a conference room at Whitmore House. Both Miss Crane and Mr. Benton used that room on Tuesday. Miss Crane entered to obtain her revised employment agreement. Mr. Benton had occupied it earlier for a business meeting. Ransom said, That proves nothing. The ribbon from the typewriter proves more. The police recovered it yesterday from a waste container in Mr. Benton's private office. Kramer looked at Benton. That evidence had apparently been saved for the gathering, Wolfe said. The ribbon retained impressions from the note. Benton glanced at his attorney. Ransom said, Possession of a typewriter ribbon does not prove who used the machine. No, therefore we proceed. Wolfe indicated the photograph of Whitmore's grey jacket hanging behind the folding screen. Mr. Benton knew another guest was expected because he had arranged the expectation. He pointed toward the jacket and asked Mr. Keene whether he knew their grey friend. It appeared to be a joke. Keene nodded reluctantly. I told Miss Sloane, he said, and Miss Sloane told Mr. Alden. Mr. Alden mentioned the stranger to Miss Vance. Miss Vance spoke to Dr. Cobb. Dr. Cobb connected him with the financial dispute. By dinner, all 8 guests believed an unknown man was present. Benton said, That happened naturally, after you supplied the seed. Wolfe turned toward Lydia. Miss Crane strengthened the illusion. She had heard Mr. Benton's joke and feared the unknown visitor might be connected with Mr. Whitmore's investigation. When she later saw Mr. Benton from behind, she accepted him as the stranger. After discovering the body, she stated that the man in grey had disappeared. Lydia lowered her eyes. You then invented a conversation with him, Wolfe said. You claimed he asked whether Mr. Whitmore would make his announcement before midnight. She spoke quietly. I was frightened of being accused. Yes, Samuel had placed control of Whitmore House in my hands if anything happened to him. I knew how that would appear. So you accepted the imaginary suspect because he protected you? Yes, Kramer said. You obstructed a murder investigation. I know. Wolfe looked at Benton. Miss Crane lied from fear after the murder. You lied from design before it. Benton's face remained expressionless. Wolfe reached for the medical report. Mr. Whitmore died after swallowing a throat tablet containing cyanide. He regularly kept such tablets in a silver box on his study desk. The box was designed with a narrow opening. When tilted, the lowest tablet slid out first. He handed the box to Kramer, who passed it to Edwin Shaw. Mr. Benton stood behind Whitmore's desk at 9:15. Mr. Shaw entered carrying account summaries and saw him there. The silver box was within reach. Shaw nodded. Yes. Mr. Benton placed the poison tablet beneath the others. He knew Whitmore's habits. After a long dinner and a heated argument, Whitmore's throat would trouble him. He would take a tablet before his midnight announcement. Ransom stood. There is no witness who saw my client touch that box. Sit down, Benton said. The attorney stared at him, then obeyed. Wolfe went. Mr. Benton's motive was substantial. For 27 months he diverted money from Whitmore House through 5 false consulting companies. The total was $612,000. Saul entered from the front room, carrying a folder. He placed it on Wolfe's desk. Bank records, Wolfe said. They trace the money through corporations controlled by Mr. Benton, his relatives, and former employees. Benton looked at the folder but said nothing. Mr. Whitmore discovered the fraud, Wolfe continued. He hired an independent auditor and planned to present the findings at Monday's board meeting. He also intended to announce the private ledger, a manuscript exposing corruption in publishing, banking, and political finance. Its appendix included the fraudulent transactions inside Whitmore House. Clara Vance looked at Benton. Uncle Samuel was going to name you. Yes, Wolfe said. Mr. Benton would lose his partnership, his fortune, and probably his freedom. Benton spoke at last. Samuel intended to destroy me before hearing my explanation. You had more than 2 years to explain. The money was invested. I planned to return it. Wolfe made a face. Thieves often describe delay as repayment. Benton's hands tightened on the arms of the red chair. Wolfe continued. The imaginary stranger was never designed to survive a careful investigation. There was no coat, no place setting, no photograph, and no servant who saw him, Mr. Benton needed only a temporary distraction, Kramer said, to get to the publishing office. Yes. Wolfe picked up the police activity report. After the murder, Mr. Benton moved among the guests asking questions. Who was the man in grey? Had Whitmore introduced him? Had anyone seen him leave? Might he still be in the house? Margaret Sloane said. He asked me first. Not first, Wolfe replied. But early enough. The questions spread, I said. By the time the police arrived, everyone had a memory ready. Wolfe nodded. Officers searched the house, streets, stations, hotels, and taxi records for a non-existent outsider. During that confusion, Mr. Benton left the townhouse for 43 minutes. He claimed he had gone to inform the chairman of Whitmore's board. Saul opened the folder. A taxi driver took him to Whitmore House, he said. The night watchman admitted him at 2:20. Benton's attorney rose again. My client had every right to enter his own office. Not to burn records, Kramer said. Saul placed photographs of a basement furnace on the table. Carbon copies of invoices, bank transfers, and forged approvals had been recovered, partly burned. A ledger had been altered to shift responsibility toward Lydia Crane and Samuel Whitmore. You destroyed evidence, Wolfe said. You also opened the office safe and removed the private ledger. Benton looked directly at him. The manuscript was stolen from Samuel's study. No. Several heads turned. Wolfe leaned back. The sealed packet in the study was not the manuscript. It contained printer's proofs for another book. Mr. Whitmore had sent the private ledger to his office safe that afternoon. Benton laughed once. That is false. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Which part? The packet contained printer's proofs, but the manuscript was not in the office safe. Silence settled over the room. Benton realized what he had said. Kramer removed the cigar from his mouth. How do you know what was in the packet? He asked. Benton looked toward his attorney. Ransom had gone pale. Wolfe's voice remained calm. Only 3 people saw the sealed packet before the murder. Mr. Whitmore, Miss Crane, and Mr. Benton. Miss Crane did not open it. Mr. Benton claimed he had merely seen its title. Benton said nothing. You opened the packet after Whitmore died, Wolfe continued. You discovered it did not contain the private ledger. That is why you went to the publishing office. You cannot prove I opened it. You just did. Benton stood. Pearlie moved away from the hall wall. Wolfe said, You also know the manuscript was not in the safe because you removed it. Benton's eyes moved toward the door, then toward the windows. The windows offered West 35th Street and a considerable drop. Kramer said, Sit down. Benton remained standing. Wolfe took a sheet from Saul's folder. This is a receipt from a private storage company. At 3:30 Wednesday morning, a man using the name Jonathan Bell rented a box and deposited a package. The old professional name struck Benton visibly. The clerk has identified your photograph, Saul said. The box was opened under warrant this afternoon. He removed a thick manuscript wrapped in brown paper and placed it on the long table. Typed across the cover were the words. The private ledger. Benton stared at it. Wolfe said, You did not destroy it because it contained information valuable for blackmail. You hope to recover some of your losses by threatening the other men named in it, Ransom whispered. Do not say anything. Benton ignored him. Samuel stole from people all his life, he said. Authors, partners, employees. He called it business. That's not a defense, Kramer said. He was going to hand me to the police and keep everything he had taken. So you poisoned him, Wolfe said. Benton's face twisted. I wanted time, that was all. I thought if the investigation went outside the house, I could clean the accounts and get the manuscript. You placed cyanide beneath his throat tablets. Yes. Lydia Crane made a small sound. Benton looked at her. "You helped the story," he said. "You told them the man was gone." "I believed you," she replied. "You believed what was useful." "So did you," Wolfe said. "The difference is that your convenience required murder." Benton's shoulders sagged. "I typed the note that afternoon. When I saw Samuel's jacket behind the screen, I made the remark to Keene. I had not planned every detail. I only needed them to think someone else had been present." "And after the murder?" Kramer asked. "I asked questions. They supplied the rest." "The poison?" "I put the tablet in the box while Samuel was at the window. Shaw came in before I could leave." "The manuscript?" "I found the false packet after Samuel was dead. I went to the office and took the real one." Kramer stepped forward. "Harold Benton, you are under arrest for the murder of Samuel Whitmore." Pearlie took Benton's arm. Ransom began speaking rapidly about statements, and the absence of signed confessions. Benton seemed not to hear him. As Pearlie led him toward the door, Benton looked back at the photographs. "They all saw him." "No," Wolfe said. "They saw you." Benton left. The room emptied slowly. Lydia Crane remained long enough to tell Kramer that she would provide a complete statement. Edwin Shaw took charge of the company records. Clara Vance carried the recovered manuscript. The others departed quieter than they had arrived. Kramer was last. At the office door, he looked at Wolfe. "You could have given me the storage receipt this afternoon." "Yes, you wanted him to confess in front of everyone. I wanted him to correct a fact only the murderer could know." Kramer grunted and left. Fritz entered to collect the glasses and announced that cold roast beef, potato cakes, and a sauce involving mustard awaited us in the dining room. I looked at the empty red chair. An entire murder investigation, chasing a man who wasn't there. Wolfe closed his eyes. "No, Archie. They were chasing a man who was there. They simply gave him the wrong name." I considered arguing that the police had also given him 4 different heights, 3 voices, and a mustache. But Fritz's announcement deserved prompt attention. For once, Wolfe had earned the final word. The guest who never arrived had been found at last. He had been sitting at the dinner table all along.